Welcome everyone to today's session of Hot Topics in Nutrition led by Julie Bosworth. Julie will be discussing the comparison of the Blue Zone diet and cancer survivorship in this session. This program is hosted by the Blum Resource Center. Over at the Blum, we are grateful to the nutrition team for this continued partnership. The recording of this session will be posted on our Blum YouTube playlist and our Blum Digital Resource Center. For those of you watching live, if you have any questions related to today's program, please feel free to utilize the chat feature throughout the session. At the end of the session, your questions in the chat will be used to moderate a Q&A. If you have any other questions or like more information about resources and programs offered through the Blum, please visit our website, www.dana-farber.org/resource center, or email us at blum_center@dfci.harvard.edu. Thank you all for joining us. I will now pass the workshop over to Julie.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for attending. I'm very excited about this topic today. And what really excites me is there's so many different recommendations that we hear for diet in the media and from well-intended family and friends that at the Farber, we talk about evidence-based nutrition. So the core of a lot of our cancer survivorship is based on years of studies that allow us to proceed with really clear guidelines. Most recently, and I would say not most recently, but probably in the last 15 years, actually dating back to 2005, a man named Dan Buettner, who is the founder of Blue Zones, LLC, originated in his concept through a National Geographic publication called Secrets to a Long Life. This concept grew, and most recently, many of you may have, like I did, starting in August of 2023, were able to view a 4-part series on the Blue Zones. And when he initially started this concept out, and before it ended up on Netflix, he had collaborated with a man named Michelle Poulin and Dr. Louis Rosario Bixby, who was a demographer, and established these zones of longevity around the world. Then in 2015, he wrote the book, The Blue Zones, Solutions and Eating, Living Like the World's Healthiest People. That concept took off, and then in 2019, Buettner visited all the zones with a National Geographic photographer. Those concepts and those photos and videos were then turned into the Netflix series Live to 100, Secrets of the Blue Zones. So that's kind of bringing you up to date over the last 15 to 18 years about the man who originated the concept of the Blue Zones. We at the Farber, like I mentioned, practice cancer survivorship. Many of the concepts discussed today are supported through the American Institute for Cancer Research, and you'll see me reference that through the video. It's aicr.org if you want to view that at a separate time. In addition to the mini-series on Netflix, Dan Buettner has given a TED Talk called How to Live to be 100, and it had about 4.6 million attendees at that time. So today's talk is going to summarize those concepts and then compare them to the survivorship nutrition concepts that we teach at Dana-Farber. And I think you'll be happy with the outcome. So when we talk about the work of Poulin and Buettner, we are talking about the areas of the world that have exceptional longevity. You know, the title of his book is catchy because it says live to 100, but really it's people who are living over 80 and approaching the category of being centenarians over that 20-year age period. So the ones in our country that are in the United States, and that's Loma Linda, California, lifestyle practices and diet are somewhat comparable to the rest of the country, but also very, very unique because it's a very specific community. And then there are other ones that I'm going to detail in a minute. There's also an experimental community outside of Minneapolis that I'll discuss at the very end of the talk. The concept or name from the Blue Zones, I thought this was extremely interesting, was originated from the initial survey done in 2013, in which the scientists used blue pens to mark the zones. So there's no reason other than that behind the concept or the title Blue Zones. These 5 areas of the world, and I'll show a map in a moment, have an average life expectancy beyond 80. They have reduced stress levels. They have intense community and family support. They embrace physical activity as a part of the way they live their lives. And they have mainly plant-based foods that are locally produced. So it kind of plays in with shelf life in that they use the products that are most available to them throughout the year. These are the blue zones: Loma Linda, California, like I mentioned, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, Icaria, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan. So they're scattered. They're all similar in that they are on water in areas with access to water, and they're all small communities. So our concepts of survivorship are, as I mentioned, part of the American Institute for Cancer Research goals. And as a major cancer center in the United States, we embrace those as well. According to cancer.net, survivorship is navigating life experiences and challenges resulting from a cancer diagnosis. So it also embraces lifestyle changes, including the plant-based diet, avoiding processed meats and limited red meat, and I'll detail that more specifically later in the presentation, avoiding alcohol, and if you do drink, observing the recommendations for daily quantities, avoiding sugar and sweetened beverages, get and stay active as a part of a lifestyle change, and achieving and maintaining healthy weight. So somewhat comparable to what we discussed with the blue zones. So when we look at how the macronutrients are split up, meaning carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, this is pretty much a very basic ring showing the distribution of those nutrients as 65% carbohydrate, 15% protein, and 20% fat. In the United States, we're in a very big protein phase. Smoothies have become protein drinks. We're really emphasizing that aspect of it. And I do think that as we go through this conversation, you might be rearranging some of your thought processes on how we're going to achieve the macronutrients in our daily diets. So with regards to Sardinia, Italy, this is just one of the pie graphs of that I could show you. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you each one. But it really is very similar to what we would view as a healthy plant-based diet if we were talking about healthy eating. So we think about the balanced plate. So I'll show you a plate, but just to view this as part of the 100% of what we would typically see in a day's eating. So once again, whole grains are about 47%. We recommend whole grains way more often than we would any kind of processed grains or simple sugar. In Sardinia, they have dairy as quite a significant portion, vegetables. And then if you notice, this is really compelling: meat, fish, and poultry. Their protein is much less, as you could see in the summary from the macrobiotic plan that I showed you in the previous slide. It's only 5%, with legumes and then added sugar and fats also in combination ending up with only 5%. So you're looking at a really significantly plant-based diet, starting with grains and then supplemented with vegetables, fruits being less so in Sardinia, but in other areas they are as much a part of it as the vegetables. So if we look at a summary of these, it's just a graph that shows the overlapping concepts between just 3 of the 5. So right in the middle, you'll see family, no smoking, heavy plant-based, and this is for between Italy, the United States, and Japan. Constant moderate physical activity, which is I'll talk a little bit about more about that. Social engagement and the sense of community, and eating legumes. And then each one of these incorporates some of them. Like this one is nuts, this one is fava beans, this one is turmeric. Each one has their own unique component, but the whole grains, no alcohol, gardening, and activities that talk more about lifestyle than in other scenarios. So what I really like about this slide is it kind of shows that, yes, food is always going to be the basis for our energy, for rebuilding the body following something like cancer, any kind of cancer treatment, be it chemotherapy, radiation, or surgery, all of those things are going to require a healthy diet to rebuild the body and then move on into the survivorship phase. What I like about this is that it shows all the other components that also matter in building that likelihood of longevity. One other thing I want to point out is when we talk about survivorship concepts, we're not just talking about prevention. What I love about the whole survivorship concept that we have, and we do a lot of survivorship consultations that at the Dana-Farber for patients and their families. And when we talk about that, it's not just preventing the return of their specific cancer. It's preventing chronic disease in general, like diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and other heart disease. And it's one of those things that we don't want it to become a confusing concept. We want all of your food choices to lead to longevity and health, kind of like the Blue Zone does, and that survivorship also can imply. So the summary of the Blue Zones, and I'm not going to read them to you in the interest of time. What I like about this Blue Zones guide is that it talks about what are the daily changes, what are the weekly changes to think about, and what are the monthly changes. So meat and dairy are more looked at as month. Like when I give a talk or talk to people specifically, it's much easier to say, don't pinpoint a specific meal. Don't pinpoint a specific day. Think about monthly and then how that filters down weekly when you go to build your shopping list and make your day-to-day meal choices. Weekly, we want to think about slashing sugar, eliminating eggs, which is something that we don't do because we really have found that eggs are not something, they're saying no more than 3 per week. That's definitely more strict than we do that because we're thinking that that's actually not something that has held up in terms of a recommendation. And then go easy on fish. And that is definitely something that is very different. And I'm thinking that where this originates is the 3 ounces up to 3 times of the week is talking about those fish that contain mercury. Some of your more oily fishes. So we're going to, that's always been a concern. I could think of years ago, back near probably closer to the year 2000, when we push fish, then the mercury concern becomes a question that others ask. So that's where the weekly concept comes in for that. And then their actual recommendations, snacking on nuts, drinking mainly water, having a dose of beans, and eating whole foods. So the summary or the base of that pyramid, that's a small pyramid, is the 95 to 100% plant-based, as we saw in the pie graph in the previous slides. So what do plants do and why is the plant-based the way we want to go? They provide healthy oxidants, which repair cells. They reduce inflammation. They repair DNA. And these are the phytonutrients in the plant that we're talking about, which are plant-based nutrients that basically are naturally fighting disease. And there are about 170 of them, possibly even a little bit more. And they occur in thousands of combinations that do these jobs. So it's really the immune system of the cell, like I wrote down in the bottom. But they reduce the oxidative damage to cells that may lead to cancer. They regulate hormone levels, and they're naturally low in calories and fat. So if you were 6 years old and viewing this video, I'd say put a rainbow on your plate. And so that's why I included this slide, because it really shows you the wealth of color and variety and texture. And when I give a survivorship consult to people, I often include a guideline called 11 foods to include in your life. And a lot of them are the depth of color that are found in your cruciferous, the green leafies that are found in kale, berries. The depth of color is indicative of the metabolic activity of the plant. So the more color, the more phytonutrients that are provided, and the more activity and benefit that you can receive from them. So for a comparison and summary between these 2 types of eating, they're both plant-based. In our survivorship guidelines, it doesn't say specifically of a percentage, but for the plant-based eating in the Blue Zones, it specifically states 95 to 100%. Survivorship is considered minimal red meat, and we go back and forth with this. Some of the oncologists will say, ooh, I'd say 8 to 10 ounces a week, 12 to 18 ounces per week. but the AICR most recently is 12 ounces per week. Now, the Blue Zones takes it a step farther, and I think this is so interesting because it's very limited red meat, 2 ounces, 5 times a month. So it's only 2 ounces less. But I think the dosage in this scenario is interesting. They don't want someone to sit down to a large Texas cut. They want to have it introduced in small doses more frequently. So when you think about 2 ounces, that's less than the size of the palm of someone's hand without their thumb and fingers on it. So that's 3 ounces. So think about how low 2 ounces is. And, I know that probably seems like a small amount, but it's one of those things that we can get used to that quantity if we fill it in with other plant-based sources of protein, like beans and eggs and dairy products. So no alcohol or limiting to 1 serving per day is the survivorship concept. And 1 serving per day, just to clarify, for a woman is 5 ounces of wine. It is 12 ounces of beer and 1.5 ounces of hard alcohol, which is considered a shot. And in the Blue Zones, it's just stated wine in moderation. And in one thing that I read, it actually said 2 glasses of red wine are recommended a day. So I think this is a pretty big variant, because in a lot of our consults, we'll say, avoid alcohol really really avoid alcohol if you can at all. But this is actually urging wine in moderation. So there's a disparity there. This is reduced for survivorship. We practice reduction of processed sugar. And then they said to limit it to 28 grams a day. So 7 teaspoons of added sugars per day. So that brings me to a point that's a question that I often get at the time when I give a talk like this. So what about fruit? Fruit is loaded with sugar. Fruit has sugar in it, yes. We know that it's got sugar in it, and that the vegetables are going to be less, but the benefits of fruit far outweigh the risks of it. So we still would include depth of color fruits in the recommendation for including 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. Whole grains, they don't have a specific whole grain recommendation other than to include whole foods. Snacking on nuts we have in survivorship, and they also they have that in the Blue Zones, but the quantity is not given there. And then for eggs, as I mentioned, we have the limiting to 3 eggs per week, and then the fish limiting to 3 ounces 3 times a week. We know we urge fish and eggs over red meats, but the numbers are not specific in terms of number of times a week for fish. So again, we in survivorship also urge beans, pulses, legumes, and then in the Blue Zones, the daily dose of beans is a half a cup. So they say specifically to add beans in. I would say that in terms of wholly whole, raw, cooked, and fermented, ours is similar with minimal ingredients, unprocessed fermented foods. And then 2 to 3, I'm sorry, this is supposed to say dairy, 2 to 3 times per day, not 2 to 3 times a week. And then the reduction of the Blue Zones is just says reduced dairy. So there's some similarities. I would like to highlight the similarities in these cases for clarity. And I think that it just makes it so we can choose to find the similarities in it as ways to direct us toward eating to prevent chronic disease and to move on from survivorship. When we look at it, this is basically our balanced plate. But what I love about this picture, and this is out of the Blue Zones Canada kind of initiative where they're taking the concept and putting it into place for the Canadian government. I just wanted to credit that because this is just a beautiful picture and it really shows what we're trying to accomplish. I see a very small amount of red meat at the top of the protein food area. I see some chicken, but notice quantities. When we do a balanced plate, we show about 3 ounces in that area, but those are all the same foods that we show showing up in it. Then we talk about whole grains. I see a piece of whole grain bread and some whole grain pasta. I see some ancient grains on there, such as quinoa. I see some brown rice and I see some farro. So when I look at that again, I'm reminded, emphasis being on whole grains. And then when you look, this is interesting because we would consider, when we talk about it in the United States, we talk about peas that are at the bottom of the fruits and vegetables section, that this would actually be a carbohydrate or a starch. So we would move that over. So you wouldn't have peas and corn and then also have whole, like a whole grain like brown rice or quinoa. So that would all be part of that. So the non-starchy vegetables and fruits are going to be the one that occupy the half of the plate when we talk about our survivorship plant-based eating. So just to clarify that. But in general, when I step back from that, I see a wonderful selection of color, variety, and texture. I see some cooked items and I see some raw items. But in general, my takeaway is the simplicity, the complexity of the grains, and the beautiful rich color selection that comes into play in that plate. So before I take some questions, I just wanted to emphasize a little bit more of the lifestyle aspect of the blue zones and how that often will how there's overlap with that and with regards to the survivorship. In our breast cancer packet that every breast cancer person who comes in for a survivorship consult receives, we have a whole section on healthy weight and exercise and things that can contribute to that. So that really plays along very similarly to the other lifestyle changes. I didn't make it into a slide because I wanted you to walk away with the concept that we're talking about nutrition in this talk, but I also don't want to completely ignore the additional, what they call lifestyle habits that create that success as well. So movement becomes a habit. They talk about physical activity is woven into the day. For example, in Loma Linda, California, many people in the community, as a way of forming community and a way of staying physically active, they talk about the level of activity of being 3 hours per day of physical activity. They do things by hand. I'm thinking back to the Okinawa population in Japan. They did not embrace a lot of industrial revolution and other things like that. They looked to chopping wood, kneading bread, making crafts, and doing things by hand that could have been replaced. And in doing so, stayed physically active and moving, not sitting all day long. Overall walking is you pretty much walk everywhere. So the communities that are highlighted in the blue zones and what a lot of more forthcoming and up and coming communities in the United States are doing is creating walking paths and ways to go through a community and be able to move about the community and do most of it through walking versus driving. An overall sense of community was also present. And when I talk to patients who are in treatment, we talk about how much better people eat when they sit down with family and friends and are encouraged to eat as part of an eating community. These people also emphasized having a sense of purpose with goals, no matter what age, establishing goals that make you feel motivated to live a healthy lifestyle that includes the healthy eating and the nutrition that we talked about. And then lastly, faith, regardless of denomination, was a component that also was included in the blue zones. A lot of the community and a lot of faith in the video in the Netflix series was surrounding food. So I thought I loved how it all kind of comes full circle and back around to including food and healthy eating in the overall healthy lifestyle that comes with both the blue zones and survivorship. I personally find survivorship nutrition to be extremely exciting. I think we at the Farber have a beautiful survivorship packet that's based on plant-based eating. We have a very nice educational material called the Plant-Based Mini Meals. And in doing so, it gives examples of how to incorporate plants as the main part of the diet. One thing I want to clarify, that doesn't mean a vegetarian diet. People always say to me, oh, I don't know if I can go vegetarian or vegan. And what I explain, similar to what we talked about today with the blue zones, the emphasis is on plant-based, blue zones being 95%, survivorship being basically having a couple of meat-free days. The USDA years back talked about meat-free Monday. That's a concept that we all know is really important. So the plant-based diet is the stronghold for both of them. So if you were to have a survivorship consultation, you're going to hear these types of concepts repeated for you in a way that pertains to your specific diet and food choices. So again, I like the control that is kind of put back on the patient or the patient looking to live a lifestyle. Perhaps you have a high risk history of hereditary cancers, a Lynch syndrome, genetic history of something. Lifestyle changes like this can be really exciting as a way to feel like you're taking some control over your prevention and longevity as you place it as a goal for your life. I'd be happy at this time to entertain any questions on the topic.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie. That was a really great presentation. I know I learned a lot, and it was really inspiring to see how successful this Blue Zone diet has been. So yes, please put any questions you have in the chat. Oh, we have one. Can you say more about what types of plants are good for different things?
Sure. So each item, for example, things like carrots and yellow peppers have a lot of vitamin A and C. So green leafies have more vitamin E and provide the roughage and that kind of thing. So what we're talking about is the color is often indicative of the nutrient provided. For example, a white potato basically has a little bit of vitamin C and some potassium when we talk about the big nutrients in it. Look at something like sweet potatoes, loaded with fiber, a half of the glycemic index, because a sweet potato has a glycemic index and causes a blood sugar bump that's only 43, versus a white potato, which much less nutrient content, is 86. So the sweet potato has vitamins A and C, fiber, and a much less of a bump in blood sugar. So when I think about that handout that we have called the 11 foods, when you look at the handout, it's all different things that give you all different nutrients. So your green leafies, they contain different types of phytonutrients and nutrients in the diet. So sometimes people say to me, what's the best nut? It's not a matter of what's the best nut. It's a matter of what are you looking for your nut to provide. So walnuts provide omega-3s. Almonds provide vitamin E. Cashews are magnesium, a great magnesium source, along with a few other nuts. So you can see the variety. I know I feel compelled sometimes to say, oh, I just want to write a checklist of things I want to get in a day. But a lot of times what will happen is it's better to have that variety and not stick to the same regimented source each day. So by providing that variety, you get a variety of nutrients.
The next question. Is there any research on how early these plant-based recommended diets must be started to have an effect on survivorship? Namely, how much of a benefit might patients already diagnosed with cancer receive from starting a Blue Zone diet?
So whether we term it Blue Zone or survivorship, the first thing that I want to emphasize when we talk about eating for survivorship and doing plant-based sources, if these are not typical to your diet and you find that they might be a stretch for you, for example, they might be a stretch to be able to incorporate them and really eat adequately without finding aversion to them, or if you're recently diagnosed and have just started treatment and you have aversions to things. Some people have an aversion to chicken. Some people have an aversion to, I have a patient who had an aversion to like the cruciferous vegetables because of the strong taste of them. First and foremost, we want you to get through treatment with adequacy of fluid, calories, and protein, and as much color and from fruits and vegetables as possible without compromising your nutritional status. So then we move on from there. And if we can kind of check that off the list, the sooner the better, because personally, when I look at our fatigue handout, which is a common side effect of cancer treatment, I'm often struck with what are the priorities for fatigue? There are 3 of them: eating frequency, including a protein each time we eat, actually 4, hydration, and then including a variety of color and texture from fruits and vegetables. So once we know that we've met our needs, adding the fruits and vegetables, which are a little bit lower in calories in most cases, is fine to start right off the bat. And then when we say those things prevent fatigue and also can build the immune system to work alongside standard treatment. I do want to refer to one patient that I had years ago who really wanted to focus on only diet and forego standard treatment. That's not a recommendation that you would find anywhere. You follow the guidelines of your medical oncologist, your radiation oncologist, and the food guidelines run alongside to help build the immune system, build your body back after treatment and even during treatment, and meet your needs moving forward into the future.
Awesome. The next question is, I know fresh is always best, but at this time of year, would frozen beans or canned beans offer nutritious value?
Yes. So, and I will say frozen is a really great option in general. So, for example, when I talk with people about making smoothies, you can use a quality frozen product for fruits and vegetables in your smoothies. And I'm thinking one BJ's brand that has a mix of berries with flecks of kale throughout. That's going to be as good as using fresh, and it's often much more economical when we consider food costs today. So that's a really great option. Canned beans are going to give you the same fiber content with just maybe a slight decrease in overall roughage, but the canned beans and beans that you would then have to soak are both going to be excellent sources of protein and are going to be excellent sources of soluble fiber in the diet that are often very helpful in the setting of diarrhea or constipation, because we can use them kind of for both in that scenario. So yes, the answer to that. And I would much rather have someone reach for something canned and have it be convenient and therefore more likely to be used. Like they say, grab a handful of beans in that day, and that's a daily recommendation, than worry about soaking dried beans and saying, oh, are they ready if I soak them long enough, and have them cause GI disturbance and then not have you revisit that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie.
You're
I think
welcome.
that's all the questions for now. This video will be on our Blum YouTube playlist in our Blum Digital Resource Center, as well as other past nutrition videos such as this one. You can visit our website at www.dana-farber.org/resource center for more information. Thank you so much for joining us, Julie. That was a great presentation. I know I learned a lot. So we appreciate your time. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julie.